Hi, welcome. My name is Mark, and I'm excited to be introducing this story to you today.
The first time the dead screen at Starlight lit up again, half of Belcross thought they were looking at a ghost. This story will show you how loneliness can harden a young heart, how broken places can become a refuge, and how the people we overlook often carry the grit, mercy, and strength a whole town needs most. On summer nights in Belcross, Kansas, sound traveled easy. A screen door slamming 2 blocks over, a dog barking behind the feed store, country music drifting out of pickup windows at the gas station. So when a pale flicker rolled across the old drive-in screen out on Route 8, people noticed. Starlight had been dead for almost 20 years. The snack bar windows were boarded. The speaker posts leaned like tired fence lines. The giant screen stood in the middle of the field with its white paint peeling in long curls, as if the whole place had been shedding itself one season at a time. Nobody was supposed to be out there. Nobody with sense anyway. By morning, folks at the diner were already talking. Some said teenagers had broken in. Some said drifters were camping on the property. One old man stirring powdered creamer into weak coffee said the place was haunted now, and maybe it had been for years. But none of them knew the truth. The light on that screen did not come from a ghost. It came from an 18-year-old girl with one duffel bag, $43, a flashlight with weak batteries, and nowhere left to go. Her name was Willa Hart. 3 weeks earlier, she had signed the final papers that aged her out of foster care. No ceremony, no proud speech, no family dinner. Just a caseworker with kind but tired eyes sliding a folder across a desk and explaining the next steps in the careful voice people used when they knew life was about to hit somebody hard. A housing list, a bus pass, a few numbers to call, a reminder to stay hopeful. Willa had thanked her. Then she had walked outside into the hard, bright heat of June and understood something she had felt for years but had never said out loud. Some people were raised, others were processed. Belcross was the last town she had been placed in, and not by choice. A small farm town with a courthouse square, 2 churches, a high school football field, and the kind of people who remembered your mistakes longer than your name. Willa had spent 11 months in a foster home on the edge of town with a couple who were not cruel enough to make headlines and not warm enough to feel like home. She had learned how to keep her socks folded, her voice low, and her plans private. When the day came to leave, she packed fast. A few shirts, a denim jacket, a photo strip from a county fair she barely remembered, and a dented metal box filled with wire cutters, screws, fuses, and little electrical odds and ends given to her by a former foster father in Missouri who had once told her, "If you can fix a thing, you don't have to fear it as much." She had held on to that. By late afternoon, the bus she meant to catch was gone. The next one would not come until morning. She could have waited near the station, could have sat under the buzzing light outside the pharmacy and pretended she was fine. Instead, she walked, past the grain elevator, past the ball field, past the last stretch of trimmed lawns and mailbox posts, then farther, out where the road widened and the town gave way to weeds, open fields, and silence. That was when she saw the drive-in. Starlight. The rusted marquee still stood by the road, though only a few crooked letters remained. One of them hung sideways, tapping softly in the wind. Willa stopped at the fence and stared. There was something about the place that reached her before she could explain it. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. It looked sun-bleached, weather-beaten, and forgotten. But it was still standing. That mattered. She climbed through a gap in the fence just before dark. Inside, the air smelled like dry grass, dust, and old rain trapped in wood. She crossed the lot slowly, passing cracked concrete ramps where cars once parked nose up under the stars. The ticket booth was small enough to feel like a confession box. The snack bar was stripped nearly bare. But the projection room still had bones. A machine, a panel, a nest of wires, a chance. Willa set down her duffel bag and stood very still in the fading light. For the first time all day, she did not feel like she was drifting. She felt the beginning of a thought she was not ready to name. Maybe this was only a place to sleep for one night. Maybe that was all. But as she looked out over the empty lot, the torn screen, and the field holding its breath in the dark, Willa felt something shift inside her. This place had been left behind. So had she. And before she even admitted it to herself, she was already wondering whether broken things stayed broken, or whether somebody patient enough could bring them back to life. Willa did not leave in the morning. She told herself she was only staying long enough to think, long enough to get out of the sun, long enough to figure out where a girl with $43 was supposed to go when every place on paper felt temporary before she even stepped inside. But one morning became 3, then 5, then a week. She found an old broom in the snack bar and started with the ticket booth first because it was small enough to finish. Dust came off in pale clouds. Dead leaves had collected in the corners. A wasp nest hung above the little window where families had once handed over cash for a night at the movies. By the time she was done, the booth still looked old but not abandoned. There was a difference. During the day, Willa worked quietly. She pulled weeds from the walkway, stacked broken speaker boxes in neat rows, sorted rusted screws from the ones she might still use. In the projection room, she opened the dented metal box she had carried from house to house and laid out its contents like something sacred. Wire cutters, fuses, electrical tape, a screwdriver with a cracked yellow handle. Small things, but small things had saved her before. The projector was ancient, dusty, temperamental. It looked like the kind of machine that had every reason in the world to quit. Willa understood that kind of machine. She traced wires with patient fingers, cleaned contact points with the hem of an old t-shirt, tested switches, listened for the faint hum of something not quite dead yet. At night, she slept behind the ticket booth on a folded tarp she found in a storage closet. The Kansas heat settled differently after dark. Cicadas thinned out. Crickets took over. Sometimes freight trains moaned in the distance, low and lonely, like they were carrying somebody else's life somewhere better. She ate peanut butter crackers, canned peaches, and whatever bruised fruit she could buy cheap from the gas station. It wasn't much. Still, for the first time in a long while, every little thing she touched stayed where she left it. No one moved her shoes. No one checked her drawers. No one told her what she could keep and what had to fit in one bag. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. On the 9th day, somebody caught her. Willa was crouched beside an outdoor breaker box near the side of the snack bar when she heard a truck engine cut off behind her. She looked up fast. A young man in work boots and a faded gray t-shirt climbed out of an electric company pickup and stared at her through the heat. He was broad-shouldered, sunburned across the nose, and looked like the kind of man who noticed details before he spoke. "What are you doing?" he asked. Willa stood slowly, one hand still holding the screwdriver, fixing something that wasn't working. His eyes dropped to the open panel, then to the organized row of parts beside her. That seemed to throw him off. Most people expected excuses, not competence. "I'm Mason," he said after a second. "I was checking a line out by the highway. Saw movement in here." Willa gave a small nod. She did not offer her name right away. He studied her another moment, then the drive-in, then her again. "You living out here?" The question landed between them, too direct to dodge. "For now," she said. Mason let out a slow breath, not mean, not pitying either. "Just surprised." "Well," he muttered, glancing back at the breaker box, "you wired around the bad contact better than most grown men in this county would have." It was such an unexpected sentence that Willa almost laughed. Almost. He left without pushing further, but not before setting a cold bottle of water on the ledge beside the booth, like he didn't want to embarrass her by making it a big thing. The next afternoon, another car pulled in. An older woman stepped out wearing flat sandals, pressed slacks, and the steady expression of someone who had spent a lifetime expecting people to answer honestly. She looked at the cut weeds near the entrance, the swept concrete, then at Willa. "You're the one cleaning this place up," she said. Willa waited for the accusation. It did not come. Instead, the woman asked, "Have you eaten today?" That question hit harder than any threat could have. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Price, retired schoolteacher, widowed. Still the kind of person folks in Belcross listened to, even when they pretended not to. She came back that evening with a paper sack full of ham sandwiches, peaches, and a jar of sweet tea. Willa tried not to eat too fast. 2 days later, Sheriff Dean Collier showed up. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt and looked around Starlight like he was measuring the trouble of it. "This property's tied up in tax disputes," he said. "Might be sold before summer's out. So whatever you think this is, don't get too attached." Willa did not answer. She had learned a long time ago that some men mistook silence for weakness. Sheriff Collier tipped his hat and left dust curling behind his cruiser. That evening, as the sky turned the soft pink of a Midwestern sunset, Willa finally got the projector to answer her. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. A shaky beam of light jumped across the lot and hit the old screen. For a second it trembled there, thin and pale. Then it held. Willa stood frozen in the booth doorway, staring. She did not hear the bicycle until it skidded to a stop behind her. A boy of about 11, all elbows and curiosity, climbed off and looked up at the glowing screen like he'd just seen the moon drop into a field. "Whoa," he whispered. Willa turned. The boy grinned. "My name's Toby," he said. "Are you bringing this place back?" Willa looked at the light spilling over the torn white screen, then at the empty field, then at the boy waiting for an answer she wasn't sure she was brave enough to give. "I don't know yet," she said softly. But for the first time, she wanted the answer to be yes. After that first strip of light hit the screen, Starlight no longer felt entirely empty. It still looked worn out, still looked weathered, half forgotten, and one hard wind away from falling apart. But now it held something different. Expectation. Toby came back the next day on his bike. And the day after that, and the day after that too. He always showed up around 5:30 when the heat started easing off and the long Kansas sunlight turned everything gold at the edges. Sometimes he brought a grape soda, sometimes a bag of chips, sometimes nothing but questions. How old is the projector? Did people really watch movies from their cars out here? Do you think this place looked better in the 70s? Willa did not always answer right away. She was still getting used to being around someone who talked simply because he wanted to, not because he needed something. But Toby had a way of making silence feel friendly instead of heavy. So little by little, she let him stay. He handed her tools, held the flashlight steady, carried small boxes from the snack bar to the booth like he'd been hired for the job. And for the first time, the work at Starlight stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like the beginning of something shared. A few evenings later, Evelyn Price pulled in with a trunk full of folding chairs, 2 citronella candles, and a lemon pound cake wrapped in foil. She stepped out, looked over the lot, and said, "If you're going to bring a place back to life, you might as well let people sit down while they watch." Willa gave her a tired smile. "I'm not bringing it back to life." Evelyn shut the car door with one firm push. She said, "and I suppose these weeds pulled themselves." Mason came that weekend with a ladder strapped to his truck and a toolbox riding in the back. He replaced a corroded junction box near the snack bar, checked the line feeding the old speaker posts, and muttered under his breath every time he found another shortcut repair from 20 years ago. By sunset, he was sweaty, dusty, and finally impressed enough to say it plain. "You know," he said, glancing at Willa as he tightened the last connection, "most people would have looked at this place and seen junk." Willa wiped her hands on her jeans. "I did see junk," Mason smirked. "Yeah, but you also saw what it could be." That stayed with her longer than she expected. The first movie night was not anybody's grand plan. It started as an idea Evelyn floated over pound cake and paper napkins. "Just a small one," she said. "A simple community night. No admission. No pressure. A chance for folks to sit outside before summer ended and remember what it felt like not to rush home the second the workday was done." Willa almost said no. Too many people meant too many opinions. Too many chances for somebody official to step in and remind her this place wasn't hers. Too many eyes. Too much risk. But Toby lit up at the idea so fast it broke something open in her. And Mason offered to get the sound working on at least a few of the speaker poles. And Evelyn, with that calm old-school certainty of hers, said, "Bellcross doesn't need perfect. It just needs a reason to come together." So they made handwritten flyers. Toby taped them at the diner, the hardware store, and the laundromat. Mason borrowed extension cords. Evelyn spread the word the way retired teachers and churchwomen always had. Quietly, efficiently, and better than any internet campaign Bellcross could have dreamed up. On Friday night, 11 cars showed up. Not 50. Not a miracle. Just 11. A rusty Ford pickup. A minivan with 2 sleepy toddlers in back. A couple of older folks in lawn chairs. A young dad with his son. People brought store-brand popcorn, blankets, folding chairs, and coolers with canned soda clinking inside. The sound crackled. The picture jumped once. One of the light poles went dead halfway through the previews. But when the movie finally rolled, and laughter drifted across the lot in loose, easy waves, Willa stood in the projection room and felt something strange catch in her chest. No one here looked polished. No one here looked impressive. They looked tired, sunburned, ordinary. But they had come. And for 2 hours, under a dark sky and a flickering screen, they were not strangers passing each other in parking lots or waving from trucks at stop signs. They were together. When the film ended, people did not leave right away. They lingered, talked, shared brownies and weather stories and local gossip. A little girl fell asleep with her head in her mother's lap. A widower Willa recognized from the grocery store sat in silence for a while, smiling at the empty screen like he had just remembered a piece of himself. And that was when Willa realized Starlight was no longer only a hiding place. It was becoming a place people came to when they were tired of feeling alone, which was exactly when trouble began. Trouble did not arrive all at once. It came the way it usually does in small towns. First as talk, then as doubt, then as a decision made in a room by people who thought they understood more than they did. 3 days after that first movie night, Sheriff Dean Collier came back to Starlight with a man in a pressed blue shirt and city shoes too clean for Belcross gravel. The man introduced himself as Randall Voss. He was with a development company out of Wichita. He spoke in the polished, confident tone of someone used to calling old places underused assets and expecting everyone else to nod along. He stood in the middle of the lot, looked at the screen, the snack bar, the rows of speaker posts, and said, "With the right clearing and grading, this could be turned into a storage and distribution site by fall." Willa said nothing. She kept one hand on the edge of the ticket booth window, steady and still. Voss smiled at her like she was a temporary inconvenience. Sheriff Collier's voice was less smooth but not much kinder. "There's a town meeting Friday night," he said. "Folks are going to talk through the tax issue and the sale. Best not make promises you can't keep until then." After they left, the whole place felt different. Not ruined, threatened. Like a house that had finally started breathing again and had just been told to hold still while someone measured it for demolition. That evening, Mason found Willa in the projection room cleaning a reel that didn't need cleaning. "You heard them?" he said softly. She nodded. Mason leaned against the doorway. "Don't let a man in shiny shoes decide what this place is worth." Willa let out a small, humorless laugh. "It's not just him." She looked past Mason, out through the little booth window toward the empty lot. "It's how people think. If something doesn't make money fast enough or fit neat enough, they call it useless." Mason didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Some people do, not all." But the next blow came from somewhere harder to brush off. By Thursday afternoon, the rumors started moving through Belcross like wind through dry grass. Somebody mentioned Willa had been in foster care. Somebody else claimed she'd been troubled. By dinner, people were saying she had run away from homes before, that she could not be trusted, that maybe she had fixed up Starlight because she wanted sympathy or because she was hiding from something. None of it was fully true. That was the ugly part. The truth in a town like Belcross rarely got destroyed all at once. It got bent, trimmed, retold until it came back wearing a stranger's face. Friday night arrived hot and uneasy. The meeting was set to be held in the fellowship hall beside First Baptist, but just after 7, the weather turned. Kansas skies could do that. 1 minute still and heavy, the next minute bruised black from edge to edge. Wind kicked up first, bending the trees near Main Street. Then the power blinked once, twice, and then half the town went dark. By the time the rain came, it came hard. Sheets of it. The kind that hammered tin roofs, flooded gutters, and made drivers squint through their windshields even at 10 miles an hour. At Starlight, the old lot filled with the sound of rain slapping concrete and rattling the booth windows. Willa was checking the backup generator Mason had helped patch together when she saw headlights swinging through the gate. Then more. A pickup. A minivan. Sheriff Collier's cruiser. People were pulling in because the church had lost power, the senior center had lost power, and somehow, by a mix of stubborn wiring, a borrowed generator, and Willa's quiet persistence, Starlight still had light. Not much, but enough. Within 20 minutes, the snack bar and covered awning were crowded with wet families, restless children, and people trying not to admit how shaken they were. Toby came in soaked to the knees beside his father, his hair plastered flat against his forehead. Then not long after, he started coughing. Not a regular cough, a tight one, sharp. Willa noticed it before anyone else. Toby's dad was already panicking by the time the boy's breathing turned thin and fast. "He forgot his inhaler at home," he said, voice breaking. "I thought we were only going to the meeting." Willa moved without thinking. "Sit him down," she said. "Lean him forward a little. Slow breaths, don't crowd him." Her voice came out calm and firm in a way that surprised even her. She had heard that kind of breathing before. Years ago, in a foster home in Missouri, a little girl named Ava used to wake up wheezing in the middle of the night whenever the air got damp and thick. Willa had been the one to sit with her while the adults fumbled for medicine. That old fear had taught her something useful. Now it surfaced when it mattered. Mrs. Price brought water. Mason cleared space. Sheriff Collier knelt nearby, silent for once. Little by little, Toby's breathing eased. The whole room seemed to exhale with him. Rain pounded overhead. The lights flickered but held. And in that strange, crowded half-dark, with children huddled under blankets and adults standing shoulder to shoulder, Belcross looked less like a town divided by gossip and property lines, and more like a place full of tired people who had all somehow ended up needing the same roof. Willa stood near the projector room door, damp hair clinging to her cheek, and realized everyone in that room had finally seen what Starlight really was. Not junk, not a burden, a refuge. And the hardest part was still coming. The rain did not stop all at once. It softened, steadied, then slowly turned into a quiet drip from the edges of the snack bar roof, like the storm had finally spent everything it came to say. Inside Starlight, nobody rushed to leave. That was the first sign something had changed. People stood with paper cups of coffee Mrs. Price had found in a back cabinet. Kids sat cross-legged on old blankets. A few men who had spent half the summer talking about zoning and tax parcels now leaned against the same walls they had called worthless. And in the middle of it all stood Willa, still catching her breath, still damp from the storm, still looking like someone who expected this whole moment to vanish if she moved too fast. Mrs. Price was the one who broke the silence. She set her cup down and looked around at the room full of neighbors. "Seems to me," she said, "this town has spent years complaining that there's nowhere left to gather, nowhere left to bring our kids, nowhere left that feels like Belcross used to feel." Her eyes moved toward the old projector room. And then a girl with no reason to owe us anything walked into a dying place and gave us one. No one interrupted her. Not even Sheriff Collier. The sheriff looked at Willa for a long moment, then took off his hat. He was not a man built for grand speeches. That made what he said matter more. "I was wrong," he said simply. "No excuses. No polished explanation. Just the truth, plain and steady." Willa swallowed hard but said nothing. She had spent too much of her life hearing people talk big right before they let her down. Words alone were never enough. Maybe Sheriff Collier understood that. Because 3 days later, he came back to Starlight carrying paperwork. Not eviction papers, not warnings. A temporary operating permit for community use. A contact at the county office. A list of what would be needed if Belcross wanted to preserve the property instead of sell it off cheap. It was not dramatic. It was practical. And somehow that felt more honest. After that, things began to move in small, sturdy ways. Mrs. Price organized a town fund and called it the Starlight Project. Mason spent his Saturdays fixing the wiring right instead of patching it just enough. Then he offered to teach a basic evening workshop for teenagers who wanted to learn simple electrical repair and home safety. Willa nearly laughed when he asked her to help. "Me? You," he said. "You see things other people miss. That matters." Toby made a hand-painted sign in messy blue letters that read, "Welcome back to Starlight." He nailed it beside the snack bar window with all the concentration of a boy performing something sacred. And that one word, back, touched Willa deeper than anyone knew. Because that was what this place had become. Not just a drive-in, not just a shelter from one storm. A way back. Back to conversation. Back to laughter. Back to people sitting side by side long enough to remember they belong to one another. By the end of August, the lot filled up again on Friday nights. Pickup trucks, minivans, lawn chairs in the grass, children running under the screen before sunset. The smell of popcorn, citronella, and cut hay drifting together through the warm Kansas air. And on one of those evenings, just before the movie started, Willa stood alone in the projection room and looked down through the small square window. At Toby waving to friends, at Mason carrying extension cords over one shoulder, at Mrs. Price straightening tablecloths with quiet authority, at neighbors talking like neighbors again. Then she looked down at the corner where she used to keep her duffel bag packed and ready. For the first time, it wasn't there. Maybe that is what home really is. Not the place where nothing bad ever happens, but the place where you stop preparing to be left behind. Have you ever had a place or a person that made you feel like you didn't have to keep one foot out the door anymore? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, stay with us for more deeply human stories, and tell us in the comments where you think Willa's life will go next.